Okay, I think we'll get started. So welcome to the annual Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce Resilient H2O event. This year, the focus is on building the blue economy through Biscayne Bay recovery and coastal resilience. Thank you for joining the conversation today. My name is Rod Braun, Climate and Coastal Resilience Program Manager for the Nature Conservancy. The event is presented by the Chamber's Resilience Committee, and it is my pleasure to serve as the chair of the Resilience Committee, along with our two co-vice chairs. They're two incredible leaders that give back so much to the community. Urella Bagay, she's president of the Bagay Group and chair of the Biscayne Bay Task Force, and Nicole Hefty, Deputy Resilience Officer of Miami-Dade County. Today's event is sponsored by Port of Miami Tunnel, BCC Engineering, Black and Beach, Florida International University, Haskell, Jacobs, and AECOM. A special thank you to all our sponsors. This event would not be possible without you, especially these days during our COVID and our new normal. The Chamber has taken an active role in working with the county, the city of Miami, and Miami Beach and others to build a more resilient Miami-Dade community. And I have two examples to give you today. First, through supporting and developing initiatives such as Resilient 305, the Chamber is a resource in supporting government solutions to build a more resilient Miami. In fact, we see our role as the Chief Resilience Officer of the Chamber, working with the Chamber committees to advance the Resilient 305 strategy. And the second example, along with other stakeholders, the Chamber supported and helped fund the recent Urban Land Institute and Southeast Climate Compact's joint report. And maybe you've seen this, it was just released, the business case for resilience in Southeast Florida. It's a regional cost-benefit analysis examining economic impacts of sea level rise and flooding and economic opportunities associated with investment in resilient infrastructure. There's a great return on investment here, investing in this kind of infrastructure. Learn more by visiting uli.org. Let me tell you, I am really excited about today's event. Biscayne Bay is a rich and important resource to the county in many ways. It's at the heart of our economy. It's really part of the region's blue economy, essentially. And the World Bank has a really good definition. I want to kind of just read this to you. It's about sustainable use of the marine environment. In this case, it's Biscayne Bay, right? So sustainable use of Biscayne Bay for economic growth, improve livelihoods and jobs while preserving the health of the bay. And the sense of urgency to restore Biscayne Bay is even stronger with climate change and sea level rise, adding additional pressures. That is why you need to take steps to tackle the root cause of climate change. And you'll see the connections today during today's dialogue. And I'm proud to say that the Nature Conservancy is also investing in the community, advancing nature-based coastal resilience projects with the city of Miami, Miami Beach, and investigating natural asset insurance, an innovative way to finance investment in our natural systems that provide protective benefits to the community. And so the timing of this event couldn't be more perfect with the release of the Biscayne Bay Task Force report and recommendations. Thank you, Urella, for chairing that important committee. We can start implementing the recommendations really beginning today. And I urge you all to take action, pick a recommendation, look at those recommendations really, and pick one and please advance it. But before introducing our next speaker who provide opening remarks, I want to run through some logistics. So please, microphones should be muted. Please use the chat box for comments, exchanges of ideas, and sharing information. If you have a question for one of the panelists, please make sure to use the Q&A feature. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Chamber's website tomorrow. And so that's some quick work by the IT folks. Thank you. So I have the pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mayor Francis Suarez. And we're proud of the work Mayor Suarez has done with the city of Miami and efforts to improve the bay. For example, the mayor has enacted several ordinances to improve water quality and reduce pollutants entering Biscayne Bay. The mayor committed $270,000 in this year's budget towards the installation of 1,000 inlet filters and pollution control devices to help keep nutrients like phosphorus and keep approximately 25 tons of debris from entering the bay each year. Very impressive. And there's a stormwater master plan to update design standards for the stormwater system. The Miami Forever Bond, which provides $190 million for stormwater and resilience projects. Mayor Suarez serves as the chair of the Environment Committee, as well as on the advisory board of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Mayor Suarez joined the Global Commission on Adaptation. I believe he's the only U.S. mayor participating on this commission, which works to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and encourages timely investments in adaptation. Lastly, I'd like to highlight an additional accomplishment that should be a model for other cities and the state of Florida. The city of Miami committed to go carbon neutral by 2050. The city is tackling the root cause of climate change, not just the impacts or symptoms. Thank you, Mayor, for the work you're doing. The floor is yours, Mayor Suarez.
Thank you, Rod, for such an amazing introduction. Sometimes you get introduced so well that you don't really have anything left to say. But I'm so honored and privileged to be on this call with so many important leaders in this space, which is really a big part of the future vitality of our city. The blue economy is something that I've been talking a lot about It's this concept where you don't have to have a separation between ecology and preservation and good economy. Obviously, water quality is at the top of that issue, which is it's not just drinkable water quality, but it's also our bay, and it's also the fact that we have some critical steps that we need to take to preserve and protect our bay and our quality of life for the foreseeable future. One of the things, Rob, that you didn't mention that we just got accomplished was a brand new ordinance which holds developers accountable for the pollution that they create in our bay. Prior to the ordinance, we had no way of stopping a developer or a builder who was actually polluting into the bay. We had very, very small fines. We more than doubled the fines. We also gave ourselves the mechanism to actually be able to stop construction when we see a site that is polluting our bay. And we also have the ability to revoke even a certificate of use, which could create a long-term paralysis of a project for somebody who's not responsible. So we in the city of Miami, myself, along with my colleagues, the vice chair, Commissioner Hardiman, who has most of the coastal areas of the city, and all the city commissioners have really rallied around the cause of saving the bay. I think the tipping point was when we saw that unfortunate fish kill a couple of months ago, which really highlighted the fragility of the bay, highlighted how important it is to maintain these balances, to maintain the oxygen levels in the bay, to make sure that the seagrass is growing, and to understand that the ecology of the bay is part of the economy of the city. Where else in the world can you swim or can you take a boat, a mile away and see a magnificent coral reefs with a plethora of fish? Where else can you have recreational fishing and spearfishing and all these things that we're able to enjoy here in the city of Miami that very few places are able to enjoy unless you're in a very exotic location. But we have to protect and preserve that. That's not just something that's going to be here forever unless we protect it. And so that's why our entire brand in the city of Miami is around the concept of forever, right? We passed a resiliency bond. We're one of the few cities in the world that has passed a multi-$100 million resiliency bond called Miami Forever, $200 million of which is focused on making Miami the most resilient city on the planet. And that's my goal. That's our charge. We owe it not only to ourselves, but we owe it to our children and to our unborn grandchildren and their unborn grandchildren. If we really want to seriously have a city that's going to be here forever, we have to see what kind of actions and activities we're doing today that are making it harder and harder to live that dream of forever in our city. So for me, it's really an honor to work with this group to emphasize this concept of a blue economy and understanding that this is not an either or. Oftentimes with COVID, we're struggling with an either or kind of scenario. Either we implement a bunch of restrictions that maintain the virus in check, while at the same time making it very difficult for people to have an economy that works, or we loosen the restrictions, which makes the virus, go more out of control. And we do that, to benefit businesses and small businesses that are struggling to get by. With the blue economy, thankfully, we don't have that juxtaposition. Really, as technology continues to advance, we're starting to see a synergy and a synthesis of things that are ecological and things that are good for the environment and for our bay are things that are good for our pocketbook and for our economics. We're seeing that with a couple of initiatives that we passed this month in October to benefit electric vehicles. We now require any development to have at least 20% of the parking spaces electric vehicle ready, because we know that there's going to be a time in the near future where everyone's going to own an electric vehicle, and that's what we're hoping for. We want to be carbon neutral, as you said, but to do that, you have to take tangible steps. We also, for the first time, defined what it is to have a solar devices in the city, and created a zoning code amendment that would allow us to have solar panels without infringing on any of the other requirements for height and building. So it incentivizes developers to do that without having to jump through any hoops to be able to install solar panels in their building, or without losing any buildability for their building. So in the city, we're trying to be creative. We're very blessed that in this generation, I feel like we have a lot of thought leaders. And one of the good things about COVID is the virtuality of our world now. It would be so much harder for us to have meetings of this type and convene in this way in an efficient way. And now we're much more efficient with our time, and we can really leverage that and leverage the knowledge that so many different organizations that would otherwise have been dispersed and maybe not have interacted. It brings people together much better. So again, for me, it's just an honor to share with you some opening remarks. I want you to know how committed I am as mayor to making sure that our Bay is healthy, not only for my lifetime, but for the lifetime of, again, the next generations. And we're working together on this. Everybody is going in the right direction. And all we have to do is continue to hold each other accountable. And we're going to do that. We're having a monthly meeting with our Resiliency Action Group, which is a tremendous working group that we have in the city. And we're inviting all the different community stakeholders to come in, because we don't think we have all the answers. But what we can do is we can act as a convening point and a place where we can aggregate information, so that these different organizations that are siloed and are working in their own core competency can be reconciled with the city, which is usually a place where people come to look for information. So again, it's an exciting time insofar as I know we have it within us to make these changes, and I know they're going to benefit so many people. And what's beautiful about our Bay is when you start protecting it, it rewards you, and you start seeing things, images of marine life that you wouldn't see before when things are not in a healthy state. So that reward is something that we can all be proud of, and hopefully will continue to propel us to protect our Bay and continue to strive for a blue economy.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor, for the work you're doing, really for taking those tangible steps that you mentioned and strengthening resilience in the community. Thanks again. So I'd like to switch gears and allow sponsor remarks, essentially. So from our presenting sponsor and our event sponsors. And so first, we'll hear from Alex at BCC Engineering.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Vasquez. I'm the Water Resources Director for BCC Engineering, Inc. I have over 36 years experience in water resources engineering, specifically in the South Florida area. And it's truly a pleasure joining all of you on the virtual meeting for this resiliency event that is of critical importance to our businesses, communities, and residents. For those that are not familiar with BCC, we have over 350 employees with over offices throughout Florida, Texas, Georgia, and Puerto Rico. Although many may view BCC as a transportation firm, we've actually have been leading numerous climate change and resiliency initiatives. These initiatives have included an analysis and planning design of resilient, innovative, sustainable, cost-effective, and adaptable best management practices throughout South Florida. We're extremely proud to have started here in Miami-Dade, and today BCC is the highest ENR 500 ranked locally headquartered firm in Miami-Dade County. BCC as a success story, we have started as a part of the small business program for the county, and we have graduated and now competing with many of the largest firms in our industry. And as we're experiencing as part of this overall resiliency workshop, many municipalities in Miami-Dade County are vulnerable to rising sea levels, storm surge, king tides, other climate-related scenarios, and they're getting progressively worse, and they're impacting in longer durations. These events are, as you know, decreasing our property values significantly, damaging vulnerable infrastructure, and impacting the quality of life of our residents. Now, one thing to note is that this does not totally is concentrated in the coastal communities. A great example is the city of Doral. We're currently doing a stormwater master plan for the city of Doral, even though it's on the west end of the city. Now, the city discharges to secondary canals that ultimately discharge to the bay through salinity control structures. Now, those control structures do not open until the fresh water is higher than the saltwater condition to prevent saltwater intrusion. So therefore, as sea level rise comes up, that higher freshwater level propagates to the west and impacts the western communities just as much as the coastal community. Something to keep in mind as the overall program evolves. So in conclusion, BCC has over 100 professionals here locally in Miami, in the Miami area, and we stand ready to assist our clients as we tackle climate change. Please visit our website for additional information, and thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Alex. Next, we'll hear from Larry and Colonel Kirk at Haskell.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can see it, yes. Good, thanks.
Great. Well, my name is Larry Levis, and regional principal for the Haskell Company, and very glad to join the Chamber and the entire Miami community on this important topic. We'll give you a shameless plug, 90 seconds, and no further pain than that. I'll hand it over to my colleague, retired Colonel Jason Kirk, who has some special knowledge gained when he was heading up the Army Corps efforts down here.
Larry, thanks. Just want to say hello and congratulations to the Greater Miami Chamber for keeping up the momentum. One of my first engagements down in South Florida was with Arella and the Sea Level Rise Solutions Conference back in 2016. And it's just incredible to see the momentum. You know, as I learned early on, serving with the Army Corps of Engineers, and now as Haskell looks at solving infrastructure challenges for clients. You know, if you take your system that starts up at Shingle Creek, down through the Kissimmee River, through Lake Okeechobee, through the Everglades agricultural area, through the Everglades, and where does it all end up? In Biscayne Bay. And so it is a connected system. What Haskell's all about, and the reason I was proud to join them as I retired from the service in 18, is we're about connections between clients that appreciate our service. You see that note about 80% repeat business. That happens because, as our founder envisioned 55 years ago, serving clients and building relationships is ultimately more important than building infrastructure. They're inextricably linked. And so Larry and I are proud to be relatively new members of this great Haskell team. We've got 1,500 team members across the globe, most of them in the Southeast US and most of them in Florida, ready to serve as we expand our footprint in South Florida, in Miami. So appreciate the chance to share with you this afternoon, and congratulations on the forward progress that continues.
Yeah, so we serve here as the one door to Haskell. Here's the full suite of services that we connect our clients with around the country and around the world. And besides our services, we're nationally ranked in markets, as you can see there on the right. These are the talking heads. One point that you may not know is Haskell was a JV partner that built the Arch Center. And we've been here really for more than 30 years, but that and the new NCL cruise terminal are sort of the two landmark projects that you might associate with us. And here's the best way to conclude that is very apropos. We'll put Jason on the spot. When was this taken?
That picture you see, well, that picture was actually, I wasn't smiling as I was still in the midst of Hurricane Maria recovery in Puerto Rico, and I flew back to the Everglades to host all of the regional officers, including at the time General Diana Holland, for a tour of the Everglades, because what I knew was important was the chance to teach, host. We had 50 military officers, I'll say tromping through, but airboating through the Everglades back in the summer of 18, just before I retired from the service. So again, congratulations to GMCC and the Biscayne Bay advocacy efforts. I think we're absolutely heading in the right direction, and glad to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Larry and Colonel Kirk. It's always a pleasure to see you, and great to see you working here in the state of Florida, Colonel. So next we'll hear from Todd at FIU.
Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the College of Arts, Sciences, and Education at FIU, we thank you for allowing us to participate in this important and timely event and are delighted to be a co-sponsor. As the newly recognized University of Distinction in Environmental Resilience by the Florida Board of Governors, FIU clearly understands the importance of the interplay between environmental quality and health and our economic well-being and resilience. FIU is leading critical environmental initiatives and finding real solutions. We're investigating the changes that are happening to our coastlines and oceans in order to protect these critically important ecosystems and resources. At FIU, our reach is global. Our research is carried out across all 7 continents. FIU is ranked number 9 in the world for impacts on life below water by the Times Higher Education. This ranking measures the university's impact on life below water and our education on and support for aquatic ecosystems. Researchers in the Institute of Environment, one of FIU's preeminent programs, and the program that I have the privilege to lead, are working toward solutions for the big challenges we face. We think globally, but we act locally. Nowhere is that more clear than right here in our own backyard. When the fish kill in August plagued Biscayne Bay, we hit the water with our state, regional, and local partners to understand why the bay sent us such a clear signal that it was in trouble. We deployed autonomous survey vessels to sample the water, deployed water quality sensor buoys that provide real-time water quality information, and deployed a fleet of student teams that collected essential information on a 24/7 schedule. To this day, we continue monitoring the health of Biscayne Bay with our research buoys. We're getting a handle on what ails the bay through our FIU research and through our close collaborations with the Department of Environmental Resource Management, the Department of Environmental Protection, Miami-Dade Water and Sewer Department, the South Florida Water Management District, the South Florida Resiliency Offices, and other university and NGO collaborators. We collectively will solve the problem. If you want more information, we have a website, go.fiu.edu/bayhealth. You'll find real-time water quality data from our buoy sensors, as well as a lot of other information. We've listed 6 things that individual people can do right now to help our precious bay, but we know that more needs to be done. FIU recognizes the importance of the interplay between environmental health and our economic well-being, and we're very proud to announce the United States' first academic program on environmental finance and risk management that is designed to formally connect the business sector with our environmental resilience research and education activities, as well as our environmental restoration and conservation programs. The Miami Forever Bond is a great example, but we also need the private and business sectors to invest in and bet on our environment. I look forward to our discussions today about how we build a resilient South Florida and a healthy, prosperous future for our crown jewel, Biscayne Bay. Thank you very much.
Great stuff, Todd. Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Raphael at Black and Beach.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure for me in representation of Black and Beach to be having these remarks with you. We have partnered with the Miami Chamber of Commerce for the past 10 years. And Black and Beach have been a member of the South Florida community since at least the past 50 years, since the 70s. What I wanted to share with you is that we are all problem solvers and we're faced with challenges in having to restore our bay. A lot of this has to do with having the right stormwater management to do. We're having to deal with water quality challenges. We're having to deal with flooding, sea level rise, non-point source pollution, increase of nutrients going into the bay. And when we look at these challenges in our area, we ask ourselves, how can we tackle them? Many times we go in and put RFPs out there and we go project by project or maybe a program. But something I like to share with you is looking for ways to innovate on project delivery, looking for ways to tackle this large challenge that we have, because when it comes down to what we need to do, we don't need to do 5 projects. We need to do hundreds of projects. A lot of these stormwater management projects are fragmented, are over a very large area. So how do you tackle something that covers such a broad span, such a broad region? Well, the best way to look at it, and something that Black and Beach through our business partner Corvius is doing across the United States, is looking for ways to aggregate a lot of these smaller projects into one bigger concept and program that can help facilitate raising funds for it, because I know we're challenged when it comes down to doing so many projects, and you got to get the funding to do as many projects as you can, or also to bring working capital to get them going, because the sooner you get it on the ground, the faster the benefits that we'll receive and the faster the level of restoration. So, you know, I like to challenge us to think for ways on how to bring innovation for project deliveries, having to look for ways to getting the work done, getting it implemented over a large area. And when you see me, feel free to ask me about community-based partnerships, because this is the innovative concept that I'm talking about currently being done in Maryland, as well as with the city of Milwaukee and in other locations. So looking forward to looking for ways to support and bring the right solutions to our region so that we can restore our bay and get going with a great economy. Thank you, everyone.
Super, Rafael, thanks so much. Next, we'll hear from our presenting sponsor, and that's Chris with Port of Miami Tunnel.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here today. When I got the email from the chamber asking us if we would like to be sponsored, I jumped on it. And the reason I did is Biscayne Bay is kind of like listening to NPR. You listen to it all the time, you appreciate it all the time, but you're always kind of sorry that you didn't donate. And that's the way I feel about Biscayne Bay. I live, work, and play on Biscayne Bay. I live at a place where I've been able to watch the greatness of Biscayne Bay every morning, every evening, every day, look at the beauty of the bay, watch its amazing colors change. It can be an angry bay, it can be a crystal blue bay, it can be an absolutely amazing place to look at every single day. And then I've had the opportunity while we were building the tunnel to have our construction tunnel, our construction trailer, only 30 feet from the bay and look out my window and have the most beautiful view of the most beautiful bay in the country as we endeavored to build the tunnel. So when we built the tunnel, one of the things that we did was make sure that, as Mayor Suarez talked about earlier, that those companies doing business on the bay respect the bay. So we had to take 250 truckloads of spoils every single night off of Watson Island. And to take those spoils out, we had to de-water all that spoils. So some of you might remember we had a conveyor belt going over MacArthur on the 395. We had a conveyor belt carrying the spoils, which would go into our wet wells, and we would dry those spoils, and then we would recycle the water through our system in a closed loop system, and we would reuse that water to use as part of our jetting process as we had our tunnel boring machine twist and turn its way through the geotechnical formations. But we're proud to say that because of our closed loop system, we had zero discharge to the bay. No water made it to the bay. It was all reused as part of our process. So as far as our corporate commitment, that was something that we did, was to try to respect that the bay. What we did with the spoils is we brought our spoils to Virginia Key, where we put 4 feet of the spoils over a contaminated landfill there. And we were able to utilize all those spoils as a cap for the landfill. Where we were able to create bike trails, walking trails, active and passive recreation. We built soccer fields. So we were able to take a dump and turn it into a usable recreational space for the community. So as we look at what's happening on the bay, that's just what I do look, because I look at what everybody has been doing and the vastness and the commitment of what folks are doing, and on the task force and all the energy that's taking place. But I look at trying to follow this when I saw that when the task force report came out, something that it said, I think it was Channel 10 said, a task force report, what does it say? Looks like the same old plan. And I think it was Arella Begay said, it looks like Groundhog Day. And that's just what it is. I mean, we know what the problem is. We know what to do. And now we just need to get on doing it. So I think there's a lot of tasks at hand. I think we've got great people handling those tasks. I'm glad, for example, when I look at everyone speaking today, I'm glad that we have our very capable WASDA director on today, Kevin Linski. I like the fact that he approaches this from science and facts and is looking at all those numbers and how they make sense. So when I look at everybody that's trying to help on this, I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged for that bay that like when we sing America the Beautiful, where it says, stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light up above. That's what we need to do, is to protect our bay. And I think we've got good folks doing that. And so I'm excited today to introduce our moderator, Jim Murley. And what I like about Jim Murley is he knows the meaning of life, which is showing up. And I say that because when we look at some of our sustainable programs that we've done at the tunnel, like one of the first projects designed for sea level rise, when we got the Climate Change Award, it was Jim Murley that showed up representing those folks in the county. But when you look at his history, it's been a lifelong commitment of showing up for everything that matters, whether it was head of communities and development for a great governor, Lawton Chiles, or being part of Climate Commission under Governor Christ, or all the things that he's done, being director of 1,000 Friends across Florida. So all these things that we care about, and all those things that make a difference in our quality of life, in our environment, and for good government and transparency, and making sure that we have someone that knows what they're doing. I can say that it's nice to have the guiding hand and the experience, and quite frankly, the decency of Jim Murley leading our way here in Miami-Dade County. So when you combine his efforts with all those who are part of this program today, I have no doubt that we're going to head in the right direction and get this done. So with no further ado, I want to introduce our moderator and somebody who I respect greatly, Jim Murley. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Chris. That was a great introduction. It is time to stop, as the mayor said, when you get a good introduction like that. I want to certainly say, when people ask me, you know, Jim, you guys do all these plans and you talk about all this stuff, what has actually happened? One of the places we go and take people from all over the world, well, there's 3 places. Our water and sewer department, and amazing improvements that are going on to adapt to sea level rise on Virginia Key, the natural area restoration that's going on in Virginia Key, and the tunnel. $1 billion project that incorporates those huge gates which protect us and the tunnel and that investment from a storm surge. So we do more than just plan and talk in Miami-Dade County about our cities and in partnership with the private sectors. It's a thrill to be here again at a chamber event. I want to say it's been an honor to serve under our chair, Arella Begay, with Lee Hefty on the Biscayne Bay Task Force. I can say with great confidence, even though the county is, yes, going through a transition of leadership with the mayor and the county commission. I don't have a crystal ball to give you the results, but I am confident that the new administration and the county commission, they've already created and funded the position of the chief bay officer. And I think they'll move under the leadership of Vice Chair Sosa to create the Biscayne Bay Watershed Management Board expeditiously. And I can tell you that our Office of Resilience, DERM and Water and Sewer, all who will represented here on the panel will be supporting this effort all the way through. Building the blue economy, I think, is a really critical part of thinking about the restoration of Biscayne Bay. Recently, a statewide organization that I have the pleasure of being a part of called the Florida Ocean Alliance did an economic analysis of the ocean and coastal economy for the entire state. And in many sectors, Miami-Dade is number one. We're number one in the total number of jobs and in the jobs based on tourism. Now, let me caveat that those numbers and the analysis was made before the COVID pandemic settled on us and changed so much of what we do. But even with that said, I think that what we're talking about today and the actions that we're going to take at the government sector, privately, and in the community, we can be part of the economic recovery of our community, and it could be based on the Bay. As Arelis often says, the Bay is our economy and our economy is the Bay. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the 5 excellent speakers that are going to participate on the panel today. Kevin, they have full, complete resumes, as you would know, and it's easy for you. You can just Google them if you need to know more information. But Kevin Linski is our Director of Water and Sewer Department. He came there several years ago from a long tenure at the Port of Miami, where he was part of the successful team that expanded the port to what it is today and will be as we recover from the pandemic, and other jobs within our county government. Lee Hefty, Mr. Durham is the Director of the Division of Environmental Resource Management in the county. He's got almost 30 years of history, starting as an environmental technician and getting in 2011 being the director of that very department that he started his professional career in. Katie Hageman, I'm honored to say, works for me in the Office of Resilience. She's a resilience program administrator. She works on everything from coordinating with the Corps of Engineers on our really massive proposed coastal storm resource management feasibility study, leading our efforts to protect our public facilities from storm surge and flooding, and will be helping the public to understand as we release the sea level rise strategy that she's been heading up for the last several years in this immediate future. Stephanie Ware is an ecologist and conservation strategy advisor with TNC, a long history of working on these issues internationally with that. I think we can say that one of the world's largest, if not largest, environmental organization. And Francesca McCann, over a 20-year history of commercial and financial leadership in water and economic energy sectors. And she's currently with Infra Management Group, which is part of Black & Veatch. So great speakers. We've been allotted an hour, and I wanted to give each one of these panelists equal time. So they'll have about 5 minutes each with a little chance to make some closing statements at the end. And then we're going to make ourselves available as a panel to answer audience questions. So the first questions are really sort of set up to take advantage of our representation of county officials on the panel that are immersed in this work. Kevin Linski and Lee Hefty and Katie are all going to take a shot at looking at this first set of issues from the perspective of their departments and a broader perspective of their experience as to where we are and where we should be going. This first question, and we'll start with Kevin, is the Biscayne Bay Task Force really focus a lot on asset management? We have so much in the ground that we don't see until something goes wrong. As long as it's working, Kevin doesn't get any calls, but he gets the calls when something doesn't go quite right. And so it is about the pipes and the pumps and the facilities that are there that take care of our wastewater and drinking water. But also it's about the nature-based infrastructure, which is so important to complement the built infrastructure. So how do we treat our stormwater in a infrastructure and natural-based way? So I'd like first Kevin and then Lee and then Katie to address these issues from your perspective about how government and the private sector and the entire community can move forward in this area. Kevin, would you go first, please?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. And first, I just want to thank the Chamber for having me here. I just want to tell you from my perspective, our department is all in on serving the needs of the Bay. And whatever comes out of these various groups that are working on it that is science-based, we're committed to investing to make sure that our system helps to be part of the solution. I'm going to try to do something ambitious to answer your questions. You have to put me on a timer, Jim, because I'm not sure I'll fit it all in. So start the timer.
You can roll into your second question.
Yeah, rolling into the second one. I'm going to try to cover 60 years of decision making in the wastewater system and its performance and how it has been integral to what's happened in the Bay. Just to give everybody a similar background, because it is somewhat fascinating what's happened in this community. I'm going to go back to the days just before I was born. If you were here in the late 1950s, mid 1950s, there was no real sewer system. There was just the Bay and the canals. There was 47 million gallons a day of raw, semi-raw wastewater dumped right into the Bay, and the Bay was in unbelievably bad shape. Only in the 1950s, in the late 50s, did a centralized system, and it wasn't centralized. It only served about 1/3 of the community start to get developed. But even then, it wasn't the wastewater system we had today. If you fast forward 25 years, now you're in 1975, there was 100 million gallons of nearly raw and semi-raw wastewater going into the Bay and into the ocean, just 1 mile off the beaches. The Bay was in unbelievably bad shape. The greatest decision the community ever made, and it took them a long time to get to it, was creating a centralized wastewater system, which we are the inheritor of, that came about mostly in the very late 1970s or early 1980s. There were still 70 pipes that were flowing wastewater into the Bay at that time. And the Bay was just absolutely unusable for human purposes. People went in, but I'm sure they came out sick. The thing that actually saved the Bay, in addition to treating the wastewater in a better, more complete way, was the ocean outfall program. So all these 70 pipes were shut off, and 3 major pipes were built that went out 3 miles into the ocean. So 90% of the waste that used to go into the Bay was land applied. The 10% that was left was placed into the Gulf Stream 3 miles out. And you saw, the Miami Herald wrote an article the other day about the health of the Bay and what it was like in the 70s and the 80s. And they said what saved the Bay in the early 80s, and they completely missed the ocean outfalls, which were the entire driver of the health of the Bay at that time. But that's when the story where the wastewater system was the savior, it started to become the problem again. If you go into the early 1990s, the system, we didn't reinvest in the system. And folks like regulators, like what Lee Hefty does today, the state and the EPA stepped in and said, you have way too many wastewater spills. At that time, we were averaging about 250 wastewater spills, almost one a day, 250 a year. And they hit us, and they should have hit us, with a consent decree, in this case, a settlement agreement, where we had to invest hundreds of millions of dollars, mostly in our pump stations and in our pipes, to try to contain the wastewater flow. So we did a fairly good job. The numbers were getting better and better. So our wastewater spills that were 250 in 1995 were about 150 or so a little over 10 years ago, but they started to get worse again. So the federal government and DEP stepped in yet again. So we had a consent decree that we got out of in the mid 90s. Not much more than 15 years later, we were right back into a consent decree for also not having invested in the system. This time around, we're investing just about $2 billion, the majority of it in our plants. So the good news is on the wastewater spill side, we are performing exceptionally well. And I will never, I know the paper has to write the articles that they write, but we handle 15% of the wastewater of the whole state. We spill 5% of the wastewater that's spilled in the entire state. Our wastewater spills now average about 100 a year. Half of the volume of the wastewater spills isn't how our system performs, it's contractors hitting our pipes. That last little bit if we wanted to drive that number down, just keep in mind, right now, we spill 1 of every 42,000 gallons we handle. Half of that gallon is a contractor hitting our pipes. That other measurement, we are pretty much as close to as good as we're going to get. We compare ourselves to all other utilities. We're in the top 5 to 10%. So we're actually doing well there. Where we aren't doing well is our plants right now. People go to sleep worrying about our spills. I worry about our spills. They're terrible. They make the news. I understand what havoc it causes for the days around the spills, particularly if it's on the water side. But it really is the plants where the next 3 to 4 years, they're limping along. But by 2024, 2025, our plants are going to be in very good shape. I just want to say maybe 1 or 2 things, and you're going to see some people light up on the screen.
Finish up, Kevin.
Did I hit my 5 minutes? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Jim.
Take a sentence or two, and you're going to owe Lee something.
Yeah. One more sentence, but I probably want to address this right now. If you take all of our wastewater spills, an average amount over the last decade that get into a water source, and you take the nutrients, and we're here to talk about nutrients. If you took all of that and you compared it to the canals, what comes out of the canals, it's for every 1 gallon we spill, there's 26,000 gallons carrying nutrients. So the wastewater spills are very problematic for the day in which they happen. They are less than 1/100% of the nutrients that get into the bay. I'm not saying they're not terrible, but you could solve all wastewater spills, have no effect on the bay.
Time to shift.
There you go.
Time to
Thanks,
shift
Jim.
over to Lee, who keeps track of those canals along with a lot of other things. Go ahead, Lee.
Jim, thank you, and thank the Chamber for allowing me to participate in this. And what I'd have to say is Kevin gave a great history on our community down here in South Florida and the way we've treated the Bay over the decades. In the early part of our more modern occupation of Miami-Dade County, we were doing a lot of dredging and filling in Biscayne Bay and chopping down mangrove shorelines and replacing them with bulkheads. And as time went on, we invented new regulations and we changed our behavior. And where we used to dump raw sewage directly in the bay, we came with a centralized system and regulations that would govern how we treat water quality. And I think we've come a long way. At the same time, we're not without an impact on Biscayne Bay. And I think, Kevin's looking at the spills that are active spills that get the most notoriety. But at the same time, the system isn't perfect. There's leaks that occur underground. And when you look at what comes out of the canals and gets to Biscayne Bay, it's essentially an integration of everything that happens on the land. And whether it's a sewer spill or a septic system or somebody, putting fertilizer on their lawn or blowing their lawn clippings in the street, all of those things have the opportunity to influence the watershed. And it's all the water off the watershed that's getting to Biscayne Bay. So in terms of the initial question about asset management, I think that we're poised to be in a much better position today going forward than we were in the past. It did take regulation in order to put us into a better position. And I think we have the attention and the buy-in from the elected officials. The county is in the consent decree. Kevin oversees a tremendous capital program in order to do infrastructure replacement. There's opportunities for doing sanitary sewer evaluation studies and smoke tests to find out how water is getting in and outside of our sewer systems, because it actually is. It isn't just the spills that get notoriety where a pipe broke and you can see it directly. It's the stuff that's sort of subtly leaking into the ground and moving through the groundwater pathway. So all of those are opportunities to minimize the impact of the centralized system. I think there's an opportunity for education because, you can't expect the government to fix everything. I'm the regulator, Kevin runs the utility, but we all flush. And sometimes we flush things that don't belong down the toilet. And Kevin will give you a big speech about, things called flushable wipes that aren't really flushable. And sometimes those things result in overflows, backups, and those are equally important. So I think when you look at what we need to do to save our bay, I hope everybody watching and the other nearly 3 million people that live here understand that they're part of the we. So I think in terms of other technology that we can use, the use of smart covers on different systems, be able to monitor the flow, getting real-time data from all the pump stations so we understand how they operate, looking at INI and trying to minimize all that. I know Kevin, when he first became the director of WASA, I was very encouraged because one of the things that Durham looks at is how much of the water that he gets at the plant is sewage versus water that has leaked into the system. And why would we want to pay to treat a bunch of groundwater or rainwater when we can work to only treat the wastewater? So I think he's got the right idea. I think they're working on trying to minimize I&I that would get into the system as well. I'm optimistic about the future for the Bay. The Biscayne Bay Task Force, Jim, you and I, Irela, and others were on that task force. I think our elected officials appreciate the recommendations, creating an intergovernmental body that will keep the attention and focus on Biscayne Bay, identifying, hiring a chief Bay officer that will also become a champion for the Bay. Durham has a lot of responsibility for protecting the Bay, but I love the idea that there's going to be someone else out there that can help carry the sword on protecting the Bay. And then coming up with a watershed restoration plan that gets buy-in from all of the local community. We need the municipalities. I think the comments from Mayor Suarez were phenomenal. We need to work together, rally the troops, and develop a restoration plan that we get behind. And I think that'll draw attention and funding for us.
Thank you, Lee. Katie, we've been talking a lot about the past and where we're at today, and you're one of the people in the county tasked with looking into the future as the conditions change with sea level rise. Your perspective on some of these issues.
Sure, and also echo the thanks to the Chamber for having this conversation, because I think we all know how important it is to protect Biscayne Bay. I'm also one of those people that admires it and enjoys it every day and look for opportunities to try and give back to it. But I think that sea level rise adds a level of urgency for a lot of these discussions. So sea levels have already risen about 5 inches since Hurricane Andrew hit. And then we expect them to be about 2 feet higher about 40 years from now, hopefully a little longer, but could be a little sooner as well. So one of the main impacts that we see in the short term is that frequency of tidal flooding. And that tidal flooding often comes in places that are not pristine mangrove preserves. As we have tidal flooding in our urban areas through our sewer system or affecting our sewer system and underground infrastructure, or let's say affecting our stormwater system, it creates a water quality issue that I think is amplifying the urgency of addressing these challenges. But we have a lot of good research, a lot of good scientists, and that have been looking at how we can adapt. And we know overwhelmingly it is significantly cheaper to just make small changes in advance of the sea level rise rather than wait for those impacts and try and respond as we see those impacts coming. So a lot of the emphasis at the county is on integrating sea level rise into the design of new projects where it's much more cost effective to do so. Obviously, if we look at retrofitting everything, the cost grows a lot. But I think one of the areas that's most promising is on the collaboration that we see between architects, engineers, designers, and planners to think about how can we redesign how we build things. And as Lee mentioned, we need to change some of the ways that we've traditionally managed stormwater, for example, or the flows into the bay, knowing that those kind of historic assumptions aren't going to be enough as we move forward.
Thank you, Katie. Francesca, government has spoken. We really need some private sector input on this, especially this tough problem of we've got a lot of plans and project ideas and what we'd like to do. We have budgets. We've had COVID, which is going to have an impact for sure. How can we pay for these things? I mean, what are some of the ideas that you run into and looked at in your work that could perhaps help us here in Biscayne Bay?
Sure, absolutely. And I will echo also what everyone said of thank you for having me on the panel and having Black and Beach here. So the funding / financing, always such a critical question with infrastructure. How will these infrastructure investments be paid for up front? What about in the long term for the O&M? And certainly the needs for Biscayne Bay are deep and diverse, which I believe is actually really exciting looking at it from the financing angle. So there are several possibilities here. One is certainly the traditional revenue or GO bonds, grants, programs such as SRF and WIFIA. And there are some distinct benefits of particularly the WIFIA program, there's a 5-year deferral period. There are sculpted repayment options, which if we look at the impact on ratepayers and how to structure a repayment stream to kind of best match the ratepayer ability over, in the case of WIFIA, 35-year repayment period. There is flexibility with that. Also, SRF and WIFIA are both at about 1% right now, or WIFIA is about 1%, and then SRF slightly higher, but very low borrowing rates. So those are options. There's also social impact financing, which can, in some cases, be bridge financing, performance-based partnerships, and then one kind of variation on a performance-based partnership and a traditional public-private partnership that we often hear of is the community-based partnership that Rafael mentioned starting out. And this is the community-based partnership is actually a delivery model that kind of takes the benefits of private sector, but can use many different sources of funding, including WIFIA, including SRF, including private financing. So any of these options and kind of looking at what makes the most sense to structure, different sources of funding and financing. I think what we have found is for kind of best, lightest impact on ratepayers, especially in the long term, combining these different sources of funding, but also something that allows for the upfront money to be invested, which can be, again, a combination of the grant and loan programs with some structure of the private sector participation in the form of community-based partnership.
Thank you. Well, we've now heard from government and the private sector. Stephanie, the not-for-profit community-based work is something that I know you all pride yourself in. From your global experience in wastewater and pollution and coastal resilience, what should we be thinking about as we tackle the issues we're talking about that are threatening Biscayne Bay?
So I also want to echo all of the thank yous for being a part of this today. I am coming into you from North Carolina, but did call myself a Florida resident for about a decade, and I am very much missing it right now as it's starting to turn cooler. So I think that I'm hearing so many exciting things. I just want to say that because I'm working on this problem at a global scale. And it's exciting to sort of dive in and hear about what's going on in Florida and in Miami and specifically. Really exciting things that you guys have going on. So we can talk more about that in breakouts. But there are, immediate problems here that really need to be addressed. And we're hearing that there's lots of solutions already on the table, which is exciting. The sooner you stop the pollution, obviously, the sooner you will see habitat recovery and all the benefits that come with that. And I think the mayor said it really well in terms of when you protect the bay rewards you. I loved listening to your mayor. I'm very jealous of your mayor. And so, the benefits, as you guys know, are, safer fisheries, drawing in tourism, improving conditions for local businesses. The environment is the economy, and more so there than in some places. So there's clearly triage happening right now for you guys. And there's a long game, though, that's really interesting. And I love the way Katie described thinking about the long game and what's happening even 15, 20 years out, which isn't actually that far away when you're thinking about the sea level rise that you guys are going to be facing. So what I think we're missing in a lot of places, and I'm curious if this is happening in Florida. I haven't heard this from you guys yet, so I'm really curious about this. But I think we're missing an opportunity to capture the value of, quote, wastewater. So we're talking a lot about treating it, but the primary concern of sanitation is to protect public health and environmental health. But as one digs deeper, you become clear that there are solutions that can create economic benefits, other benefits that are just as valuable from both an environmental and an economic perspective. So to put it simply, we're flushing away human waste. When we flush away human waste, we not only pollute our environment, but we also flush money down the toilet. And we miss an opportunity to address other environmental problems and needs, such as climate change, water scarcity, sustainable agriculture. So recycling our human excretions is the ultimate recycling. So seeing waste management as a closed loop system, so you're not losing it and flushing it or injecting it or piping it out to sea, rather you are supporting a circular economy where the human waste is seen as a resource rather than waste. It really is. It's chock full of all kinds of good stuff. I'll talk about that in a minute. And capturing that value instead of creating more expensive problems, right? So we're creating problems by polluting, but we could actually be creating benefits by addressing it in a certain way. So it's really this no-brainer, win-win-win. And it's the way of the future. This isn't futuristic or fantasy. This is happening in places. So with limited resources, such as water, as I said, you know, phosphorus, we're talking about phosphorus as a pollutant, but it's also critically important to grow our food, right? But it's limited. We don't have an endless supply of phosphorus and we're just dumping it, right? So, and fuel, obviously we talk a lot about in our world these days of getting cheap and sustainable renewable fuels. These are scarce and they're difficult to procure or extract, sometimes even causing damage to the environment. And so it makes sense to focus future solutions on capturing the value. And I want to give you just a few examples of this. So just to give you some scale, 1.1 billion gallons of treated water a day, that's treated water where we spent all that energy to treat it, are discarded into the ocean and could be used. It could be used for agriculture, it could be used for agriculture or other purposes. Instead of releasing all this water, some communities are actually treating it to meet federal standards and reusing it as drinking water. So they call this toilet to tap in some places, really sexy, sort of not sexy sort of name. Orange County in Southern California has been operating the world's largest wastewater to drinking water plant for the past 30 years. It provides reclaimed water to its customers through an indirect system and is projected to supply 130 million gallons of drinking water to 1 million customers in the next 3 years. So they've been doing this a long time. They have a really good track record. There's been a lot of innovation since they set up their system 30 years ago. Similar scale projects are happening all in different parts of the world in really high density populations like Singapore. So this is something that this can happen at a small scale, low density population, or a much, much larger scale. So, you know, fresh water is just too rare and too valuable. It's critical to life, right? And to be throwing it away. So just getting into the values, sorry, I think somebody needs to mute. Just getting into the values of human feces or poop. I love to break taboo, and this is a great crowd to do this with. The value alone is estimated to be about $10 billion a year. Just with that's the value of, just the value overall, $10 billion a year. 1 billion people produce 400 million in methane gas annually. And with that same 1 billion people and that same poop, you also can provide 85 million tons of charcoal equivalent that can be used for industrial use. So that methane gas can actually supply somewhere between 10 and 18 million households with their annual electricity. So this is extraordinary, really, that you can take a truly renewable resource, as long as you've got people, you've got poop, and you've got urine, and turn it into energy and power and drinking water. So
Stephanie, I'm going to have to maybe let you just stop on that poop issue.
There I am. I'm done. So,
well, we'll be back to you.
Okay.
And it's a great segue to the next set of questions that we're going to talk about with the government panel, because, you know, poop is kind of universal, and we're besides our treatment system, we've got 100,000 septic tanks, even still in Miami-Dade County, that we've got to have some short and long-term actions about. And there's been a lot of work and study, and I know the county would like to move forward on treating the most vulnerable, the ones that are most likely to have an impact on the Bay. So I'm going to ask Kevin and Leah Katie again, from the perspectives they have, to address the issue of what's our next steps on septic tanks, and how should we be laying the groundwork for a longer term solution. Kevin?
Yep. So first off, we're going to sell our poop to Stephanie and make so much money we're going to convert all the tanks. I didn't know it was worth that much, but I'm looking forward to your second go around. Septic tanks are no doubt a big issue. If you look across the country, 20% of the country is on septic tanks. 30% of Florida is on septic tanks. And around Miami-Dade County, there are about 120,000 septic tanks, all of which deposit various things into the groundwater. Most notably, when it comes to the Bay, at least from my perspective, it's about 11 pounds of nitrogen per person, and about 1/8 of that in terms of weight, in terms of phosphorus. That's how much those tanks contribute into the Biscayne aquifer, and the Biscayne aquifer much of the time gets into Biscayne Bay. So there's a report that's been in the hopper for some period of time. Lee Hefty and his group worked on it. Our group worked on it. It identifies the first opportunities to potentially start converting over tanks. Whereas it's not clear 100% of all tanks need to be immediately converted, it's pretty clear that there are a series of tanks around water bodies that are contributing fairly directly into canals that should be the first to go. I want to first say something about the conversion of septic tanks for sea level rise, because that was actually what the study was initially about. Out of the 120,000 tanks, really from here to 2040, there will only be 10% of the tanks that become non-operable because of sea level rise. So the issue of septic tanks is an issue all about itself. It can be put in the context of sea level rise, but it doesn't need to be. If conversions need to take place, they need to take place independently. I've also had a lot of chance. I just have buried myself in the nutrient issue and the Bay issue, and where nutrients come from, how they get into the Bay. It's becoming clearer and clearer to me, though there's some great people studying this, making great contributions, that the septic tanks in the north are a huge part of the problem for the North Bay. And you think that's a no-brainer, I get it. It kind of somewhat is, but that carves out the statement that the septic tanks far out west and those in Central Dade and South Dade may not be as problematic immediately. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be converted eventually, but the ones in the North Bay are. And I'll just give you the simple story of how it works. The North Bay is really only about 10% of the physical mass of the Bay. It's not much more than that. And it receives nearly 40% of the water. And its health has gone down dramatically, we know, over the last decade, many people thinking it's nutrient driven. And in part, I think that's true, because the water flow into the North Bay just over the last 25 years has increased dramatically. And with that flow, it is picking up nutrient dense Biscayne aquifer water being absorbed into the canals and flushed into the Bay. And when it comes to this fish kill, it's kind of reflective in a really short time of what's happening a long time with the Bay. That fish kill, there's a working theory of one of the biggest causes of the fish kill, which is if you look at the 6 days previous to the fish kill and the amount of water released from 2 canals into the North Bay, it replaced 30% of the entire North Bay water volume in just a matter of days, with water that was very low in oxygen from the Biscayne aquifer and high in nutrient density. So I say that because stormwater systems, and Lee can cover that part, septic tanks are certainly a huge part of the issue of the deposit of nitrogen and phosphorus into the Biscayne aquifer. So we've had 2 smallish programs to convert some tanks. One was a general obligation bond program that we are finished planning with and starting to construct, which is converting about 2,000 tanks, many of these commercial tanks, along certain high density corridors. And we have a second program, which is smaller again, but it involves maybe 100 different properties in the Ogis area that no longer could develop because the septic systems really couldn't sustain higher density. Now, I don't want to get onto the issue of financing only because I would run out of time, and I use too much time at the front end.
You're finished up on this one.
So I'm just going to touch it, and I'm going to let other folks go on. The challenge is the department would love to be a part of the solution, start converting over a lot of these tanks, the ones that are highest impact. On average, if you sit next to water and sewer infrastructure now, and you're on your own septic system and you want to attach to the pipe, that's 15 grand. It's not insurmountable, but it's 15 grand really to the property owner. That's the way it's set up. If there is not a sewer pipe in front of your property and you average it across the whole county, 15,000 turns into 50,000 per home for those that have to be converted. So we're looking at a bill closing in on $4 billion if we wanted to do 100% conversion. So I have more to say on that. I won't, but I'll tee it up for the next person. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Lee, take it from here, from the perspective of what Durham deals with and these issues of septic tanks and related issues.
Great, thank you. And to your question, and I think, Kevin did a great job of sort of teeing up some of the challenges. I think in order to figure out how to take steps forward, I hate to use the analogy about elephants and what we eat and how you would eat an elephant, but I guess I just did. You do it a bite at a time. And I think as a scientist, I think we need to use data to drive where we start. When you look at replacing every septic system in this county, you're looking at many billions of dollars. And I don't know that we need to replace every septic system in this county. I think where we need to start is on the systems that we have evidence that have a measured impact on water quality for Biscayne Bay. And so what we're looking at within my own agency is trying to take advantage of existing wells that are distributed associated with gas stations to look at nutrients. Durham, we regulate air, water, and soil throughout the entire county. So we usually look at gas stations for petroleum, but we took advantage of over 500 wells at gas stations to measure nutrients in the groundwater to see if we can draw conclusions between different land use activities and its input into the groundwater and how that might find its way into the surface waters of the canals. Because again, everything we do on the watershed ends up in the canals and flowing out to Biscayne Bay. Kevin identified funding as a big challenge. So I think I'm going to leave that there. That is a big challenge. How do we get the funding done? And when we do infrastructure, so now when sewer systems are constructed, as my agency approves permits, we require laterals be placed so that you may not be paying the $50,000 fee, but you do still have to disconnect your septic system and connect to it. To address some of the systems that may be farther away from areas that are of high risk, we might be looking at performance-based systems. So not your traditional septic system, but something in between running a sewer pipe and using the old system. Maybe you come up with a performance-based system because it may not make sense to extend sewer infrastructure everywhere. The last thing I'll mention is probably one of the most important aspects of my agency. In Miami-Dade County, we live and work over the water we drink. We drink out of the ground. So what we do on the ground and to the ground could potentially end up in our drinking water supply. So we have many regulations that affect what you can or can't do on a piece of property if you do or do not have a septic tank. So there is a business case for extending infrastructure so that properties that otherwise, if they had an accident and it spilled and it went down the sink, it doesn't end up in the ground, it ends up in the sewer pipe. And not that we want the central plant to have to get it all, but it's better to have it contained there rather than to end up in the ground. So there is a business case for extending infrastructure. And I say we use good scientific data to drive where we start.
Thank you, Lee. Katie, could you finish off this set of questions from your perspective, again, knowing how sea level rise impacts a lot of these events of flooding, high tides, and storm surge?
Yeah, and I'll say I think what we've done with the sea level rise strategy is say that our first action under that strategy is to look at smaller areas in more detail through the Adaptation Action Area program. And so one of the first adaptation action areas that we're looking at is the Little River. And by looking at a smaller scale, we can look just at a microcosm of these larger issues and perhaps have more opportunities to address them in those places that are at highest risk. So, the Little River is one of the contributors to the North Bay, which Kevin already talked about. And when we go and see the areas that are being flooded with our king tides or, the major rain events we've had recently, we can see parcels where the parcel is totally flooded or the yard is flooded, and we know that if there's a septic system there, it's not likely performing as it was intended. So we can see, even at a small scale, just a few blocks apart, a big difference in terms of the vulnerability to flooding and the vulnerability of the underground infrastructure. But conversely, we also know that we can't just fix one piece of infrastructure. It doesn't do a lot of good to bring sewers to a place where the road still floods, or where the homes still flood, or where you can't pick up the garbage because of the bins getting knocked over. So trying to use adaptation action area as a mechanism to think about holistically, how do we address the infrastructure needs in this place? You know, if we're going to raise the road and at the same time replace the water line, is that also not a good opportunity to more cost effectively put in the sewer infrastructure or address other needs at that time? So again, trying to use this as a way to look at these multiple needs and see if there's a way to do it more cost effectively. Conversely, there might be places where we say it's just too expensive, that doesn't make sense here. Is there another approach that we could use? But again, trying to look at it comprehensively so we make these infrastructure decisions together in a cohesive and complementary way.
Thank you, Katie. Francesca, you've had a chance to, again, listen to government struggling with these issues, and the private sector, we often rely on to help us come in as time for the solutions and quantifying how much it's going to cost. So what can we do on this water quality and coastal resilience area? Can you give us some more ideas on public-private partnerships? And I know you mentioned community-based partnerships earlier.
Absolutely. And just really highlighting and echoing one of the things that Katie just said, which is you can't, or does it even make sense to deal with one of these issues without dealing with all of them? Because then, you know, what true solution is that if they're still flooding, or if, you know, the stormwater issues or SSOs aren't dealt with, but we are doing septic to sewer. So coming back to the community-based partnership approach, which again is a delivery model that can use any source of financing or various sources of financing. It really is the mechanism through which the financing is delivered, is a really great way to aggregate different projects, aggregate different types of projects, and kind of form an all-inclusive, holistic approach to some of these challenges. As Rafa had mentioned at the beginning, you know, the speed of implementation, the economies of scale with really taking a programmatic approach to looking at these solutions. And I just want to hit on some of the highlights of the community-based partnership. These structures are performance-based, so payments to the private partner. And as Rafael had mentioned at the beginning, also our private partner with this and the leader in the country with the community-based partnership model, actually the innovator of this model is Corvius. So the private partner, it's tied to the achievement of the goals of the program. And these goals are set jointly between the public and private partner. There's also a huge risk mitigation element. So the funding is tied to successful delivery of the infrastructure, and this holds the private partner accountable. Job creation, this is a huge element, and very importantly with this, it is local job creation, WB, MBE, SBE, job creation, all of that can be written and structured into the partnership agreement. Aggregation, as we mentioned, in various types, and then flexibility. So there is a lot of flexibility on how the partnership is structured, how it's defined, what are the metrics, what are the goals and the accountability. Asset management was mentioned at the beginning, and this is a very critical part of it, the life cycle asset management. So a long-term maintenance plan that ensures compliance throughout the partnership. And then there's a live performance monitoring mechanism of being able to do kind of real-time live performance. So again, the flexibility with this structure, the accountability, the payment, and when that comes, often it can be it can be structured so that the repayment comes after the infrastructure is set, after the infrastructure is developed. Job creation, there is construction job creation, post-construction, long-term. An example that is really great with this is Prince George's County, Maryland, and this is with the Chesapeake Bay estuary, that had pretty extraordinary MBE, SBE, WBE participation, as well as local participation. So it's about 75% local participation, over 40% MBE, SBE, WBE, and a really strong mentor protege program. So again, looking at, and these are, 20, 30, 40-year partnerships, very long-term, and can take on all of the different elements and really address the multiple challenges of Biscayne Bay. So.
Thank you so much. Stephanie, you were giving us some really interesting information, almost at the global level that I know you operate. But I know TNC is also helping to advance nature-based solutions and coastal resilience, Miami-Dade County and Southeast Florida at the local level. And can you tell us more about some of the projects TNC is partnering in Morningside and Brittany Bay?
Yeah, before I do that, I just want to chime in on this discussion around what's going on with septic systems. And it sounds like there's 120,000 septic systems that may need to be converted or in some way. And I just wanted to share, this is around nature-based solutions. Something that we're doing with the Nature Conservancy and local governments and many organizations in Long Island. And if you're not familiar with it, happy to share that work. But we're working with them they have a lot of cesspools as well. They have the same problem of sea level rise inundating their septic systems, and they have a massive nutrient pollution problem in Long Island Sound. And they've discovered that nutrient pollution is coming directly from the septic systems. So they've been working with SUNY Stony Brook, some scientists there. They have a clean water center to adapt septic systems and add on an extra component, basically a box that has sand and organic material in it. It's very simple, low cost, low tech, and it's getting the water coming out is something like 3 milligrams of nitrogen per liter. It's really, really, really efficient. It's removing 90% of the nitrogen, and it's another option when you're thinking about the nitrogen flowing or the other nutrients flowing into Biscayne Bay. There might be some other options besides hooking up to a sewer system if that's not feasible for a house. So I just want to bring that up because it's another way to address some of the issues you guys are having and potentially some partnerships there. So the Nature Conservancy in Florida is working on a number of many things, but a number of coastal resilience projects through our climate adaptation programs. And they're integral to the work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and support statewide climate plan, but they also have some really positive impacts on the problems we're dealing with today. So Brittany Bay and Morningside projects in particular are pilot projects, so they're not large scale, they're really to test and demonstrate using what we call nature-based solutions. I've heard that referenced a number of times today, so it sounds like it's very familiar to this group, that really address the risk of coastal flooding. So these are short-term solutions. They are addressing the intermediate impacts of climate change, not the long-term. We've got some bigger things that have been discussed already with 2 feet of sea level rise in the next 20 years. But these are things that can be done to minimize impacts now as we tackle those bigger problems with climate change and coastal security in Florida. So these are living shoreline projects and again, serve as models, and we can take them to scale to address statewide issues, but we first have to demonstrate and tweak and figure out exactly how to make them work. Basically, we're restoring habitat. So I heard somebody talk about cutting down mangroves and putting up seawalls. We're restoring habitats that naturally protect coastlines. They naturally protect from flooding. They naturally protect from storm surge. And in this case, we're using mangroves and other types of coastal vegetation to create coastal protection. And by doing that, a seawall can do that to an extent. It's much more expensive to do a seawall. You also increase benefits to the fisheries and even tourism because you're creating habitat, right? And you're creating other environmental services besides that flood or storm surge protection. So I think we Katie actually made it really clear in how this relates back to wastewater and sanitation. This is reducing flooding. This is reducing the pressure on the sewer system, the wastewater treatment plants. There's all this water that's coming in from those storms from all kinds of different directions, whether it's surge, flooding, or just rain. And so this minimizes that. It mitigates it to a degree, depending on the size of the project. The scale would be linear in that way. But so it seems like it's one thing, but it's actually addressing a problem with wastewater by just minimizing the impacts that those wastewater treatment plants or sewer systems are going to affect. Same goes with septic systems. I mentioned Long Island. We saw in Superstorm Sandy with that flooding coming into those communities that they got sewage backing up in their homes because there was nowhere for the water to go. So yeah, so we're really trying to help figure out how to keep that water back and protect the coastline there.
Thank you. Well, panel, you guys did amazingly well in a very restricted time frame. I know you all could have talked more on the issues you addressed, and we hope that that'll happen now because the Chamber puts a great deal of value on audience participation and questions. So we've got, I think, around, if I'm correct, around 20 minutes here, a little bit, to take some audience questions and you can augment your remarks. So let me see. I think I'm supposed to drop down. This is dangerous when I have to do the technical part of this. Let's see where we are. So Barbara McCann was just asking a question. Is there any thought to adding sandy slope at the end of almost continuous seawalls to plant mangroves and other saltwater aquatic edge submersible plants to assist in nutrient uptake? Is this feasible? Some satellite views of the bay surrounding by seawalls until you get into the southern end where the bay meets the Atlantic. So a couple of panelists would perhaps like to address this. You want to start, Stephanie? Did you hear the question? Was I clear enough?
I was actually trying to find it to read it because I am very much a visual person.
All right. Well, I think if you do Q&A at the top, and that'll drop down. And this question was towards the.
It was Barbara's question.
The bottom, scrolling 225.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Does that help now?
Yes, yeah. I can see it. Just a second. I want to make sure I get it. Yeah, so actually that's a really interesting solution, Barbara. So you're looking at adding sandy slope at the end of a seawall to plant mangroves. So anytime you're adding sand and adding mangroves, these are good things for both environmental filtration as well as coastal protection. So there might be, that sounds kind of like a hybrid between the two, and it would be something that would be worth exploring. I've never seen it done before, but it's certainly, this is the time to get creative and think about how we combine natural solutions with what we call gray infrastructure, gray solutions, a seawall, obviously. So yeah, I think that would be an interesting thing to play around with.
And Jim, I could add a little bit to that if you'd like.
Yes, please. Go ahead, Lee.
So what we've had at Dade County through Durham in our Biscayne Bay Environmental Enhancement Program for probably about the last 40 years, there's a requirement when you construct a vertical bulkhead to place riprap boulders along the edge of the bulkhead. And the idea behind that is it's twofold. It extends the life of the seawall, and more importantly, it provides cryptic habitat and also minimize refractions of waves off the vertical bulkhead. So by putting riprap boulders on a slope along the edge of these bulkheads, you create an opportunity for things to grow, and you minimize the wave energy that gets refracted off vertical bulkheads. And in many cases through our environmental enhancement program, we've recreated mangrove wetlands along the shorelines. We typically try to work on the land side of it rather than preempting the bay. What we'd like to see in the bay is more seagrass growth, and where we can restore areas where mangroves are, we certainly like to do that, but we wouldn't want to destroy seagrass to plant mangroves. We'd like to find opportunities for mangroves to grow on the upland if we can. And where there's enough room, we've actually scraped uplands down to create coastal wetland habitat. And when there are no significant resources in the bay, we are able to sort of compromise and put mangrove planters out into the bay as well.
Thank you. Kevin, if you can, do you see the drop-down menu? Kevin, are you on?
Yeah, so Q&A, I think I see it.
Yeah. There's some questions at the very beginning when you were speaking, Kevin, about, aside from calling 811, some questions about the treatment levels of the release on the pipes. You could just maybe address those. You see them?
Okay, so there's a first one from Stephanie. Do you want me to do that one?
Yes.
Okay, it says aside from calling
And the
811.
next one also.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the next question too, please.
Got you. I guess this concerns place. Does
Okay.
WASD have an in-place requirement specification to protect critical utilities like water and sewer transmission lines? Boy, I hope I get this right, because I know I have people who work for me who get it better. So I think I started at the beginning saying half the spills in the wastewater system for quite some number of years are because contractors hit our pipes. There are over 100,000 times a year where contractors have to drill in, around, or under our pipes. Every time they do that, we go through the 811 system and we go out and we mark the land. We first do non-penetrating identification of where these systems are, and then we mark it. So we don't rely on one system before we go out. We actually do it live in the field. I don't know if that was the question. Now, what we are doing is we have some pipes you never want to hit because they're force mains. They're so large that if you break them, it's going to be terrible. So now we go out in the field during the time in which they're doing the crossing, and we work with them to make sure they don't hit them. It is scary the amount of times our large pipes have been hit. The second one, what's the treatment level used to treat Miami-Dade sewer before it is released to the ocean, primary, secondary, or tertiary? I'm going to call it secondary. And just to describe it, if you took the wastewater that comes out of the ocean outfall, people aren't going to believe this and there'll be an objection, but it seems to be true. You took the pipe and you poured it on top of South Beach. It would not, under a normal circumstance, trigger a DOH warning when they come and test the water. That's how clean it is when our system is operating properly. When we inject the material down beneath the earth, we clean it. I'm going to call it a third time. It's tertiary. We had high level disinfection. That water is of such a quality that it meets the state's requirement for reuse. So that water that we inject down into the earth, you could use to water your lawn in most places in the state.
Okay, thank you. Katie, there's a question here on the drop-down menu towards the bottom about the core study, the Coastal Storm Risk Management Back Bay Study. Can you find that? Brian Johnson, about 2:30.
I do, yeah, the Great Wall of Biscayne. Yeah, so I think for those that aren't familiar, the Army Corps of Engineers has been doing a study after Hurricane Irma, and the intention of the study was to look at ways to reduce damage from storm surge. One of the components of that plan is the Great Wall of Biscayne, which is mentioned here. The proposal of putting a wall and gate system across the Miami River, the Little River, and the Biscayne Canal. That's one component of the study, but there are a couple other components of the study that are less controversial, and that we're very, very supportive of these concepts. One is expanding natural and nature-based, this is what the Army Corps calls green infrastructure. So expanding mangrove restoration down south around the Cutler Bay area. Another component of that study is protecting our critical facilities from storm surge. So that could involve flood panels, hardening critical equipment, fire stations, wastewater assets, those kinds of things. And that's something that the county is already investing in. Obviously, WASD is leading that work, but we're trying to do it on all of our critical facilities. But that's a place where additional federal funding is very attractive. We know we need to do it, and the benefit of having a federal partner is the 55% federal cost share. And so, if that measure moves forward and eventually is appropriated by Congress, it'd be several years before we get started, but those resources would really help us protect critical facilities. And then to flood-proof the structures, individual buildings, and that could be either through elevation or for commercial structures where it's allowed to put in flood panels. So the core study also includes a large number of what they call non-structural or essentially flood-proofing buildings, and that's something that we also try and invest in on the day-to-day level here in Miami-Dade, but the resources, of course, are what we need in order to scale it up. So just mention though, there's other three components in addition to the flood wall and barrier that's mentioned. I think the question about whether we could use something else, another material, in terms of like plexiglass or some sort of transparent material so as not to disrupt views, is an interesting question. And that would be something that in the core process would come in the next study. So if it moves forward after this, at this stage and gets appropriated by Congress, looking at the specific designs and materials would be something that comes probably several years from now as you get closer to refining the design. But yeah, there are a lot of innovative systems that could be used. The Corps, of course, is risk averse, and so they want to use the safest materials that they're aware of. But it is interesting to look at what are some of the other innovations that could be applied.
Thanks. Francesca, there's a question. I'm just going to ask you to at least start and see if you have any impressions. From Barbara McGann at 218, Martin County held a series of water ambassadors led by Sea Grant, develop a comprehensive program to convert. If this might relate some of the community-based things you were talking about.
Sure. So I'm also trying to read and find the,
it's a 218.
218, perfect.
Thank
Water
you.
ambassadors led, okay, by Sea Grant. Based on damage assessment. So I can read the question for the audience so that it's, Martin County held a series of water ambassadors led by Sea Grant. Martin County has developed a comprehensive program to convert septic to sewer based on damage assessments. They also use some innovative new methods such as lift stations, et cetera, to facilitate this. Their website shows areas, overall plans, methods of funding, resources. I don't actually see the question in here. Barbara, I'm not sure of the question, but I look forward to seeing what the fund, I don't see any question in here, but I look forward to seeing what the funding and funding thoughts are. Unless
my interpretation is if you, from that statement, which isn't in the form of a question, do you see things that might be possible applied from your experience here?
Sure. So yes,
any of the things.
No, so that's a good, if we look at, and we can look at septic sewer, and so this is, she mentions, based on damage assessments. And I would say that as we are structuring a community-based partnership and looking at the various components, so septic to sewer, stormwater, SSO, and looking at kind of how to assess and how to prioritize which projects within this programmatic approach are prioritized, which are delivered first. We may look at factors such as damage assessments and where are the priority projects for one, and then the second would be where's the most bang for the buck, so to speak, where's the best return for the community based on prioritization of the different projects. So I don't know that I have a feeling I didn't answer that question because I didn't see one in there, but that was just a comment on kind of how to assess and prioritize some of these projects. And again, I would just highlight the, one of the huge benefits and flexibilities of that approach is that unlike paying for just a project that has to be completely designed, developed, complete, this can really take a big holistic approach and vision.
Thank you. So
Sure.
Stephanie, I'm going to, if you are scrolling at 217, Maria de Pena, raised a real question. I know it's got to be in all of our minds, and we're hearing about it, and maybe from your global work, you might have an observation on this. I expect so does Kevin, but if you'd start, what about COVID in the sewage systems?
Yeah, okay. So just to go back to what Francesca was saying, I just wanted to say how important this holistic approach is on so many different levels, both from a finance, community level, and even just an ecosystem level. So it's kind of, I think, where we will be successful going forward if we are thinking about things bigger picture. Okay, so bigger picture, I don't know, COVID. What I know about this, and this is interesting because it's obviously it's sanitation is a huge public health issue, and obviously COVID is as well, is the science right now is just showing that you can detect COVID in sewage. And so I'm not sure about the article that you put, it looks like it's a sewage testing. Yeah, so we're going to be able to use, and they're starting to do this in places like college dorms and densely populated areas where you can test the water coming out of a building and know how much COVID is happening in the building. So whether that means the sewage is a potential vector or a way to get sick by being exposed to it in some way, I have not seen that. That's something I've been watching because I think a lot about the way sewage flows make people sick. So far, that's not coming up, but it is a really interesting way to use sewage to help us understand what's going on in the public health. So I would just say that.
Kevin, could you add to that?
Yep, so I want to say we were one of the first utilities in the country who submitted its wastewater for detection of the coronavirus with a company out of Boston that was in conjunction with a couple of universities. And we have been doing that on a weekly basis for all of our plants since beginning of April. And it's been interesting. One of the challenges has been, it certainly detects the coronavirus, but if you're trying to match it with known positives, because we know how many people are positive when in the community from testing, it is very up and down data. So a lot of times it's kind of directionally correct, but if you're looking for more nuance from it, it has not been successful. So we have 3 other efforts for studying our wastewater for coronavirus with other universities as well. I'll skip them and just say that there is one being led primarily by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, that is attempting to get the correct algorithm to make best use of the testing data. And they are trying to figure out what's the best testing method. It's fun, but it's not entirely useful except on college campuses. It works well there.
Good. All right. Audience, I'm trying to monitor the questions and allow the panel all to have a chance to participate again. Panelists, there's a number of questions about septics. There's not just one per se, but how we're prioritizing them and how we're going to deal with them. Is anybody feel that they wanted to say anything more about septics before we leave this panel discussion?
Jim, I'll just kind of chime in. I think
Thank you.
I think it's kind of important to say you can't replace them all at once. So the important thing to do is to identify the systems that really need to be replaced in order to address public health and the environment. And so by using good scientific data to identify where you see the impacts, I think that should help prioritize the systems that really do need to be replaced. And again, because we don't have all the money that's needed to replace all of them at once. And I'd mentioned earlier this concept of using performance-based systems in places where it makes more sense to not go extend pipes, but to improve the level of treatment. But in places where you are measuring impacts, there's a good argument for expending the resources to put the infrastructure in so that you can eliminate the systems and have people connected.
Good, thank you. Kevin, there's a question here. Could we get weekly, it's 152, anonymous attendee. Can we get weekly updates from Miami-Dade County water samples? Maybe this is Durham, onto the FDEP dashboard and FWC weekly updates.
So
you see that one? That's probably Durham, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'm imagining they're probably talking about our ambient water quality monitoring. And so what we've done at Durham, we monitor the surface water quality in the canals in Biscayne Bay. We have a 40-year data record. We go every month and we collect samples at about 100 different places. And it's synoptic sampling where we're way out on the western reaches of the county in the canals. And I have another team that's sort of in the urbanized area in the canals, and then a team out in a boat at the same time during the day, collecting samples throughout the watershed and out into Biscayne Bay. That data is all public. All of our information is public. A weekly update really doesn't work for a monthly program where you're collecting, hundreds of samples that need to go through laboratory analysis and quality control assurance checks before they become available. So I'm not sure it needs to be a weekly thing, but if someone wants any information from Dade County, Durham, contact our offices. All of our information is public. My staff are happy to share the information. In my career at Durham, more than 30 years, back in the 90s, I managed the water quality program and I responded to many people's requests for data. So we're happy to do that.
Okay, panel, you can see the other questions. Here's what I'd like to do, and we've got a little less than 10 minutes. If you would all five of you, I'm going to start in reverse order. So I think that would be Stephanie first, and then Francesca, Katie. Take a couple minutes, no more, less, to just summarize where you see us on these issues or any question that we didn't get to. We're aiming to get at 2:55 where we can segue over to Arella. So I'm going to start there. Stephanie, no more than two.
Okay, so I just wanted to address Barbara McAdams' question about seagrass and reintroduction of that, because that's part of this habitat restoration that we focus on at the Nature Conservancy. And to answer your question, Barbara, this is very much something that is done in many parts of the world. Chesapeake Bay probably has done it the best. They've spent a few decades figuring out how to do it right, and they've finally gotten it. But restoration of seagrass habitat is really important for water quality. We're finding more and more the science is showing us an important role that seagrasses play. They also do a lot of other important things for the ecology. So I would say, yes, it's possible, and we've gotten a lot better, the collective at figuring out how to restore those systems. But you can't restore them if the water is in bad shape. So you have to address those threats that caused the problems to begin with. And then finally, I think for me, I'm an outsider in all of this. And so my comment is just one of respect and excitement around what you guys are doing in this part of the world. It's such an incredibly important environmental resource globally, the resources that you guys live amongst. And it's exciting to hear all of the work that's going on, the science-based, evidence-based work that is happening, and the innovation and the interest from the community. So, and clearly some great leadership. So I just wanna wrap with what the mayor said, the ecology of the Bay is the economy in the city. And it's something just to keep reminding ourselves of wherever we are. So thank you again for the chance to talk.
Nice to have your connection, and we appreciate TNC. Francesca.
Certainly. So I think I certainly echo Stephanie's work of the excitement around this and just being really impressed with the vision and commitment, certainly, and the idea that there is a pretty tremendous solution to this, a scientific community-based solution. And then of course the financing angle has to be a piece of that because it's integral, and otherwise how does all of this move forward? But really excited for that. And then, as I look at it again from the financing perspective, it's how do we create a pretty incredible solution that helps the ecology, helps the economy, and helps the community? And how does all that get wrapped up in something that makes this all possible, from a funding and financing perspective? So a lot of excitement, and again, a lot of just really commending everybody involved at how, the true commitment and vision with all of this.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you, Black and Beach, for supporting the chamber and the work you do in our community. Katie.
Yeah, I think I just have a few closing thoughts. I think one of them I would say is I think while we have obviously make the headlines all the time about being one of the most exposed to sea level rise, and we can see obviously the changes in our bay happening right now, I think it's also a place where such a dynamic environment, so much changing in the community so quickly, that I think there's a real opportunity to integrate climate change into these decisions and into the changes that are happening now, and that will provide long-term resiliency. But I think one of the things is I still see a need to integrate it into those major decisions that we're making, and also to think about how we can adapt to sea level rise in a way that's most protective of those shared resources that the economy is based on. So thinking about how we can achieve those twin goals of protecting the community from flooding, obviously, and sea level rise, and also protecting the relationship between our community and water and our environment here. So, but I think there are lots of good ways to do that. We talked about it today, so I'm excited to continue working with everybody on the call and in the community as we think through how we adapt to sea level rise over these next few years.
Thanks, Katie. Lee?
Jim and everybody else on the panel, thank you. I was glad to participate. I think, we're all invested in this community, whether we work here, whether we own a business, whether we own a home, we're invested in this community. So there's a business sense for protecting the resources. It's part of what makes Miami-Dade so spectacular. A lot of our economy is driven by tourism, people wanting to come experience what we get to experience because we happen to live here. So I think, everybody would agree that to protect our own investments and including our quality of life, we are willing to do what it takes to protect our resources. And I think what I'm optimistic about is hopefully through the Biscayne Bay Watershed Management Board and elevating everybody's understanding about the role they play in affecting natural resources that we live with, hopefully we can get nearly 3 million people on the bandwagon to do what is necessary on an individual level to protect the water resources of the county. And that includes, even our elected officials. We was talking to someone recently, we all, if you own a home and you think about your roof, how many of you have money set aside for your next roof? Well, that's what Kevin has to deal with. He's got a lot of infrastructure that needs to get replaced. And so we all repair our roof when it leaks, but we're not always thinking about repairing it ahead of time. And I think we need a little more sort of forethought and planning and a willingness among all of us to invest in the future that we need to fund so that this place stays incredible. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. And for the audience, please don't drop off. Kevin's going to finish up, then we're going to have Arella make a few comments, and then we're going to shift to the breakout session. So this is just and just pan off the entire program. Kevin, bring us a couple of minutes.
Yeah, maybe just one final comment of encouragement. And I kind of came up with this thought after I'd been at the Water and Sewer Department about 2 years. If you are a bright person, use your common sense, read the newspaper, listen to what people say, and you make major decisions on water quality in the wastewater system, you will be dead right 60% of the time. 40% of the time, you'll believe you're dead right, but you may not have spent enough time with the data. What encourages me is that I've been hearing from people like Lee and other folks who are working in the background, who are very data driven, who get to answers based on a lot of research, and they're not the easy answers. So what has been encouraging to me, even when I saw the Biscayne Bay Task Force report, the first recommendation on the back had to do with using science-based metrics to set goals for the Bay. And I just like to say, there's a lot of smart people now all pulling a boat in the same direction. I'm just very encouraged by it.
Thank you, Kevin. And thank you, panelists. All of you in the audience, if you'll just, give the official appreciation for their time, their staying within the allotted time, and their expertise and commitment. I have the honor now of segueing over the program to my good friend, the past chair of the Biscayne Bay Task Force, a host of public service things that Arella Begay has done in our community, serving on the governing board of the South Florida Water Management District, the many roles in the Girl Scouts of America. I could go on, but she's just a good friend, and she's our biggest person to keep us on point on these issues. Arella.
Thank you, Jim. And I want to thank the panelists for an amazing and engaging, productive conversation, which is what we like. Thank you so much, Jim. You did a great job with your moderating and keeping everybody on time. But it's really clear that we have a lot of work to do to develop and implement solutions to many of our climate and environmental challenges here in Miami-Dade County. So as we deal with the impacts of this pandemic, and particularly the economic impacts of this pandemic, I hope that today's takeaway is that government can't do this work alone, not without the help of the business community. So as you heard a few times today, our tagline here at the Resilience Committee is the environment is the economy. And I know without a doubt that there'll be plenty of business opportunities and some economic stimulus if we engage now and expedite our infrastructure improvements to make Biscayne Bay healthy and resilient. I actually view this opportunity similar to when Miami-Dade entered into the consent decree, and the capital projects that followed provided much of the needed relief to our businesses and helped us really move past the past recession and moved us out of it. So with that, I want to thank our sponsors really for supporting our annual H2O workshop. We've been hosting this workshop for 8 years, and I'm just very grateful for the Chamber leadership, Chamber staff, and the members of our Resilience Committee for working so hard to make these events so successful. Our members of our committee, Chair Rod Braun and Nicole Hefty, we always like to keep the government and the private sector working together in this committee, and it shows by the turnout we've had today. And in normal times, we would now be networking with each other in person, but we're virtual. So this year we decided to create at least some kind of an opportunity for our participants to further engage with our panelists and in a dialogue and share information and share solutions. So if you signed up to a breakout session, you should have received a separate Zoom link. So with that, I want to thank everybody who participated, and we will continue our conversations on water quality and coastal resilience in a few minutes. So I see you all there. Thank you.